Okay, let's talk about a Game of Thrones. I am actually really glad that I had a lot of time in between the time I first read the book and my second time around, because I feel like it gave me a good separation to be able to really think about what I thought about the book, as opposed to my first time around when I was just reading it, you know, in the 3-chapter spurts to review for the channel. I don't really even count that as a review. It was more like a recapping. Also, a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to talk to an actual psychiatrist about some aspects of this book, because he had also read it. We were at a deposition and there was some downtime, and we were talking about it, and I got some good insights from an actual medical professional. So, here's the thing. I was really able to see the Snape-esque characteristics of a lot of the characters this time reading the book. Snape, and by Snape I mean Harry Potter. Because a lot of these characters are just awful, but they have a lot of layers to them that I don't want to say I didn't notice the first time around, but I definitely was able to pick up more on the second time. Also, I think it was good that I had a good separation from the show ending and just being not wanting to talk about the show. So this time around I was able to like focus on the book a lot more and really take in everything that was going on. But the characters really do have, I don't want to say a lot of depth, they have a lot of layers to them, and I feel like Grimm has this ability to give you what he wants you to know and then have you like figure out things for yourself in a way that I don't want to say that he didn't write the characters well or there wasn't character building, because I feel like he knows these characters very well, but at sometimes I felt like when I was reading them, he felt like you already knew what he knew, or he wanted you to fill in some of those motivations for their actions yourself without actually giving it to you. That could be so later on he revealed things about their past, and so then when you think about these things later, you're like, okay, that's why he did it. Or he really just thought you knew what he knew, because sometimes that happens with writers. I'm not criticizing Grimm, calm down. I'm just saying there were times when I felt like he left things out or didn't really tell you what the motivation were behind their actions, because he wanted you to think about it later on when he reveals something later. So they aren't holes, they're left there intentionally, I hope, because you know what I mean? Because he's so detailed at writing trees and food. My God, the food. I felt that sometimes the characters just did things and you knew what they were doing without him explaining why. And for someone who's so detailed, I had a hard time figuring out whether that was intentional or not. But I do think it's intentional, because he's masterful at this world. You know he knows every single character and why they do what they do. So I feel like it was intentional so he could reveal things later on and it would be like, oh, one of those oh moments. Or when he was writing this, he really was just like, they already know it, it's fine. I feel like I knew the characters well and I knew what was going on, but that was mostly because of the show characters, and I feel like now I can separate them a little bit more. But yeah, this time reading it, I was like, okay, he hasn't really told us anything about them yet, so I can't really assume that this is going to go the way that the show did. I hope not. We'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, like I just felt like, it's so hard to explain. I felt like some of the motivations and things that you think about the characters, you fill in yourself sometimes. And I noticed that more because I think I mentioned when I was reading the book the first time that I love book Jon Snow. Because his character, you get so much more insight into what he's thinking and everything in the book, obviously, because you can hear his thoughts and what's going on in his head, but you don't really get his thoughts. He says things, like things happen in a scene and you assume what they're thinking because of what's said in the scene. Like the scene with him and Tyrion, when they first meet, and Tyrion saying, you know, wear the word bastard like armor so it can't hurt you, whatever. You know what he's feeling because you're assuming what he feels as a bastard child of Ned Stark, but he never outright says it. And I noticed that there are a lot of those fill in the gaps moments. I don't want to call them gaps. Fill in the backstory moments for all of the characters. But I really did like Jon Snow more in the books than I did in the show, and I feel like that's because we could kind of see more of his, I don't want to say his facial structure. We could kind of see what was going on with him a little bit more than we could in the story. And I don't know if that was intentional. I don't know. But it's hard to translate things from book to visual media sometimes. And this goes into Dany. I'm not going to touch on every character. There are too many. I love show Dany. We all know this. However, book Dany, I still love. But her story was a little... I noticed it more the second time around. Her story was so before and after that there was no gradual middle to her getting to the point where she came to want Khal Drogo's approval and identify with him. This is what I was talking about with the psychiatrist that day, by the way. We had a break. I had the book with me. He asked me if I read it. I told him it was my second time around, and we started talking about Dany. I either mentioned in the first time reading this or either in the show that I think she had Stockholm Syndrome, and a lot of people were pissed off about that. But I consulted a medical professional, and that's the first thing he said. He's like, so what do you think about Dany? And I was like, yeah, you know, her characters go through so much in the first book and everything. I'm like, and I said, honestly, I felt like it was Stockholm, but I don't know what I'm talking about because that's not my field of expertise. And he was like, yeah, it definitely was. And I felt so good. I love being right. But because her story, like, she goes through so much with him. This is one of the things that really make me mad with D&D all over again, because in the show we see her first encounter with Drogo, which was horrible. We physically, actually, on screen, seen her crying while being raped on scene. That should be horrible enough in and of itself. But in the book, it was so repetitive, just over and over. It was such a physical and mental breakdown of I want to say character, but of this person in this book, this 13-year-old child, that finally she comes to a point where she's able to, where she feels like she has to just embrace this culture, embrace this life to survive. How is that not Stockholm? It is. The captor and the captive have intimate time spent together. They're together. I was like, he's raping her nonstop, weeks on end, to the point she's crying and everything. It's such a breakdown that eventually she's just like, okay, I have to just succumb to this way of life for my survival. And then she kind of just takes on that person. That's Stockholm. It is. That's what he said. And it made it even more apparent in the books because it was such a, like, before and after. We see that, and then she has a scene with is it Miri? I can't remember what her name is right now. Where she's like, how can I, please him? Can you help me, with making him nicer to me? Basically, it's kind of just like, how can I help this be better? And she goes through that whole thing, and then she just has sex with him outside with people watching. It's just like boom, boom. There's no in between. It was just so much more apparent in the books that it was a means of survival, and also just by that process of being broken down over time. Even, it doesn't matter how long it was. It could have been a couple of days. It could have been a couple of months. It was a few weeks, whatever. She was broken down so much physically, crying, mentally, in pain, bruised, that it was easy for her to just take that on as a way to, like, not commit suicide, which is where most of those cases end up. That was a really good conversation I had with him, by the way. It was enlightening. And he also mentioned, like, that was probably very prevalent during that time where, women being married off into families that they didn't really know, or situations that they just have to kind of, like, roll with the punches, so to speak, and just, there was probably a lot of that going on back then. Thank you. Just, anyway. But it kind of made me pissed off at D&D even more, because I felt like we had those two scenes in the show, and again, you don't want to show rape over and over, even though it's in the book so much. They have those two scenes, and then it kind of jumps to Dany being like, you know, having the conversation with the servant of how can I, you know, please him, can you teach me? That it kind of gets glossed over a little bit how completely broken down she was. And it made me not like Khal Drogo even more the second time around. In the show, it was like, because again, we had those two scenes, but then they showed them being in love, and he cares for her, blah, 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 even though he really doesn't treat her any different in the books at all. You know, they have better conversations. I guess she's teaching him common tongue, but it just made me pissed off. Just, there's that. Speaking of someone else who pissed me off, let's talk about Catelyn, because I mentioned a few times in the show how much I really liked Catelyn's character. She was mean to Jon Snow, and they had the moment where Jon Snow said goodbye to Bran in when he was unconscious, and she was like, "Get out." And I was like, "Girl, calm down." But that was really the only interaction they had between the two of them. But in the books, you just feel how pissed off and how much animosity she has towards Jon Snow, who was a baby, who did nothing wrong except being brought into the world against his will. Like, it wasn't his choice, he was brought here. Be mad at your husband. But we have with her, she's forgiven Ned completely. She's at this, in the beginning, they have this scene where they, you know, just made love, and she's laying there full of his seed, is so disgusting. And she's hoping that she can, you know, become pregnant again and bring another child into this world, because she loves her husband so much. She's just filled with love, and she wants love, and she has all these kids, and she loves him because they're his kids. She has forgiven Ned so totally and completely, but you still have this grudge against this kid. What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Are these revenge babies you're having now? Are you doing this to prove that you are his wife and your kids will come before this other child always? Are they like revenge kids against him? Like, girl, calm down. Have a Fanta. Revenge babies. I don't know. I have no respect for her so much. It just pissed me off so much. She's just completely forgiven Ned, who's actually done the bad thing, and you are holding this huge grudge against this kid who's done nothing but wants to have a mom. Like, Arya's so great. Love Arya even more in the book. Sansa, you have a hard time feeling any kind of sympathy for her at all in the first book, because she is just like her mother. Her mother raised her, you know. She's like, she wants to be a lady, she wants to be a queen. She's a lady of position. Like, you know what I mean? You don't like her. I'm very interested to see her book character later on. I have started the second book. I'm very excited to see what happens to her character later on in the books and see how she grows. Yeah. Tyrion, again, it goes back to, we get the story with him and his father, with, you know, the prostitute that he married, and the whole thing was set up, and then his dad forced her to have sex with the soldiers in front of her. Like, oh my god, this is just, I really worry about Grimm's brain. Like, George R.R. Martin, his head is something else. But so we know his background, we know why he hates his father. Tywin is just evil. But we don't have any of his motivations for being so mean to Tyrion yet, other than, you know, his wife died while having him. But I mean, usually you would be happy to have a kid as a reminder, I guess. I don't know. I've never been in that situation. I have no idea. But there's really no reason for him to have so much hatred towards Tyrion, other than the fact that he's disabled. I really like Tyrion because he's smart, and you can see his wheels turning a lot more in the book, and you can get a lot more of his thought process and everything. But I don't know. I feel like if I had read the books first, I'd be more on fence about Tyrion than if I had seen the show portrayal of him, which goes for a lot of the characters. So I can understand why book readers feel certain ways about the show characters and why they like them or don't like them. but you have to kind of separate those two. They're two separate entities. You can't, like, I understand the book is the original source and all that stuff, but certain liberties are taken on screen, and those characters, they're different characters. They're based upon book characters. They are not the book characters. I think I would have had a little bit more apprehension about a lot more of the characters. I will say this, like I mentioned before, George is so great at world building, the scenery and everything, but the characters' motivations and things going on with them, he kind of leaves to the reader's imagination, probably for reveals later on, to have those like ooh moments. I can appreciate that. If you're going to do a whole series, you want to have those moments so people relate back to the first book and be like, oh, wait a minute, or the second book, or wherever the reveals are given later on. I get that. I just wish there were a little bit more details in some of the like the scenes where they told you some of the reasons why things happen, or why a character said things, or like they explain themselves a little bit more, you know? I will say this, and I'm probably gonna get a lot for this. If I were not reading this, if I hadn't watched the show and I weren't reading this series for the channel, I don't know if I would continue. One, the brutality is a lot, and I'm cool with it. Like, I like a good violent scene. I don't feel like all of the rape scenes are necessary. I just don't feel like all the sexual assault scenes are necessary. His style of writing with all this detail and everything else, but I feel sometimes some of their, not their dialogue, but just the way they interact with each other is a little, I don't want to say thin. It's just not my style. I don't know if I would continue reading this if it were not for me reviewing them for the channel. And I say that because it's taken me so long to continue. When I'm into a series or I'm into a book, I pick it up, I read it, and I keep going. If I'm into it immediately. I'm kind of like that with TV shows too. If I'm into it, I know it within the first 3 shows. I can just feel it. I can just tell. And it's the same thing with books. I want to keep reading. These I've kind of put off. I read a little bit, I put it down. It's just not my style. I do want to continue so I can see how it delineates away from the show. Just so I can be mad at D&D even more. I feel like I said so many things different ways. I don't even know if I said all I wanted to say, but that's all I'm going to say. That's it. Sorry this wasn't up on Tuesday, but it's up today. And also the second book review will be up at the end of the month, probably the last Wednesday of January, because there are 5 Wednesdays of this month. Happy New Year, by the way. So that will be up at the end of the month. I hope you are enjoying the bad movie review. The Leprechaun went up on Wednesday. If you haven't watched it, watch that. Join my Patreon. I want to do a lot of stuff over there. And that's it. Everything is linked down below. I will see you on Wednesday for my next movie reaction. And that's it. Have a good weekend.